welcome everyone to this session of Discovery, where we're focusing on economics. So a bit more about myself. I'm Angela. I'm currently a PhD student in financial economics here at Oxford. And before that, I did my master's also in economics at Oxford, and I did my bachelor's degree in Sydney, Australia, where I am from. So my current research focuses on monetary policy, fiscal policy, and also climate finance. um, I really like economics because I think you can see its applications to the real world in a wide range of settings. So economics combines both maths and writing. So you do write essays and you use a lot of mathematical equations and modeling, which I find very fascinating. You can also see its applications to a range of different fields. For example, you can choose to specialize in macroeconomics or microeconomics, statistics, gender economics, environmental economics, labor economics, really anything you can think of, you can apply economic tools to try and address that problem in society. So that was what brought me into the world of economics, and I hope that this session will be interesting for you as well. So moving on, this is the outline for today's session. I've just done a bit more of an introduction about myself. Then we will launch into what is economics. We'll talk a bit more about the different economic agents that are there in this world. What are their decision-making problems like? How do they think? How do they rationalize? And then finally, we'll go on to consumer decisions and also a bit more about game theory, which I think is a very fun part of economics because it combines bits of psychology as well. So I've talked about that. Now, what is economics? So I will move to a different tab, and I've got a video first to play, so enjoy.
What does the word economy mean to you? You've probably gathered that it's to do with money, but you might not have realised that it's also about you. Economic decisions are being made all the time. These decisions affect things like whether you have a job, what you earn, and what you do with your money. What's happening in the economy directly affects your decisions. The economy is like a big network of different parts that work together and influence each other. A decision made by one part can have a knock-on effect on the rest. Let's take a closer look. Let's start with you. Most people play a part in the economy by being a consumer. That's someone who spends money. Consumers make decisions about what they buy and how much they spend. Many consumers also receive money. They might be employed by a business and receive wages. They might be self-employed, like plumbers or hairdressers who run their own businesses and receive money from people who buy their services. Or they might be retired or unable to work and receive a pension or benefits from the government. Businesses make money by selling goods or services for more than they pay for them. They decide the prices they charge, who they employ, and how much they pay their employees. If businesses are successful, they grow, and they can afford to employ more people or pay their staff higher wages. Businesses sometimes have to buy goods or services from other businesses. For example, a fashion shop might buy its clothes from a clothing manufacturer. The manufacturer depends on the fashion shop for its income, so it needs the fashion shop to be successful. High street banks are not that different from any other business. What sets them apart is that they work with money, looking after it, lending it, and helping you pay for things. They let both consumers and businesses save or borrow money. When someone saves with a bank, the bank pays them a little extra money. When someone borrows, the bank charges a little extra money. This extra is called interest. If you borrowed £1,000 and the interest rate was 5%, you'd have to pay back the original amount plus 5% of it, so £50 extra. The interest rates offered by banks can have a powerful influence on your decision to either borrow or save money with them. The economy works in a delicate balance, with money flowing from one part to another. Too much or too little can lead to problems like unaffordable living costs or lots of people being without a job. There are two institutions that make important decisions to control the amount of money flowing around and to keep the economy stable. But who are they? The government aims to have strong, stable economic growth, helping businesses thrive. It decides how much money, or tax, to demand from workers and businesses, and then how to spend this money to benefit UK citizens, for example by running hospitals or schools.
The Bank of England is very different to high street banks. For a start, we have over 400,000 gold bars downstairs here in the vaults, worth over 100 billion. But our main job, which has been for over 300 years, is to look after the UK economy and the financial system.
A key responsibility of the Bank of England is to ensure that you and I have access to the banknotes we need every day to make payments.
We also make sure that you can make electronic payments 24 hours a day. And another job is to make sure that the high street banks with which you save and borrow are safe and sound. The Bank of England also plays an important role in keeping the UK economy strong and stable. The bank sets bank rate, which is the key interest rate in the UK economy. It is used to influence high street banks, from which people and businesses borrow or save.
At the bank, one of the biggest decisions we have to make on a regular basis is whether bank rate should be increased or decreased, or whether it should just stay the same.
So our decisions at the Bank of England affect you very much every day of your life.
When interest rates are higher, saving is more beneficial, so people tend to save more. It's more expensive to borrow money, so people tend to borrow and spend less. When interest rates are lower, loans are cheaper, so people tend to borrow and spend more. Businesses can thrive. But if there is too much money in the economy and too much demand for goods, prices tend to rise. Of course, the price of some things will go up by more than others, and some prices may go down. But when most prices go up, we call it inflation. One of the jobs of the Bank of England is to keep inflation at 2% per year. If inflation looks set to go above the 2% target, the Bank of England would probably increase interest rates to encourage people to spend less. But if inflation looks likely to fall below the 2% target, the Bank of England will probably cut interest rates to boost spending in the economy. Expert economists at the Bank of England make informed decisions about the level of prices in the economy and whether prices are rising or falling too quickly. They then adjust bank rate to keep prices stable. As we've seen, along with other influences like family, friends, and the media, the economy can play an important part in influencing your decisions. So, next time you hear the word economy, pay attention. They're talking about your life, your decisions, and your future.
Great. So I hope that gives a bit more of an introduction about what economists actually do. And now let us switch back to my main slides and continue. So what is economics? Well, right now in the video, you've heard about all of the different agents that exist in the economy and how they exist with each other. What they try to essentially do is use and want resources in the economy. And the fundamental objective of economics is to allocate scarce resources between all of the different agents, the different parts that you've just seen in the video, because all of them have different needs and wants for how they want to use the resources. So economics is about how to allocate that in the most efficient and equitable manner. Now, there are three main components of the economy that use resources: the consumption side, the production side, and the distribution side. So consumption is the demand side of the economy. It refers to households and individuals like you and me who purchase and consume final goods and services, such as an ice cream cone, such as a laptop, such as the bread that we buy from the supermarket. The production side refers to the firms that take materials and resources, then transforms them into final goods and services that can then be sold to the consumption side of the economy. So often a firm will see a business opportunity, a gap in the market that has not been filled, and then they will come up with a creative business idea to try and fill that gap in order to gain a profit. The distribution side of the economy is one that essentially links the consumption and production sides together. They are essential in this economy because often consumers and producers do not exist in the same location, and so we need the distribution side to bridge everything together. Production and distribution both exist in the supply side of the economy, whereas consumption is the demand side. Now, businesses transform resources into products that can be used and sold in the final goods market. Products can be split into two types, goods and services. Goods refer to anything that is tangible, so anything that can be physically felt, touched, seen. So when you buy food, when you buy a table, a chair, when you buy a phone, all of those refer to goods. There is a physical exchange of goods and money taking place during the transaction. On the other hand, services are what we call intangible. So you can't literally see them, feel them, but they still nevertheless exist and provide utility to economic agents. So this can be things like human resources. When you go and get a haircut, when you go and get your nails done, when you go do banking services, or when you go seek financial advice, all of that refers to human resources and human services. So you can see that resources don't have to be physical and tangible as well. They can also be intangible. Now, delving more into goods, there are different types of goods at different stages of the production process. So primary goods are things that can be consumed in their primary or natural form. So when you pick an apple, it is a primary good because you can eat it right away. A secondary good is something which needs to undergo a stage of manufacturing or transformation before it can be consumed by the household, by the individual. So when you think of a car, for example, then it has undergone a stage of manufacturing before it can be sold. And tertiary goods are things that undergo many different stages of production before it can be finally sold in the market. And also, it can be sold in the primary or secondary market. It can be re-exchanged and resold. So when you think about, for example, a house, then perhaps the wood, the concrete, those are the primary resources that we source from the land. Then the poles, the tables that are there in the house, they are the secondary goods that come along with it. And then the tertiary good is the final house itself, which is sold at an auction or via a private transaction between a buyer and a seller. So as society progresses, as technology develops further, humans have more and more needs for different types of goods and services. And so goods tend to get manufactured through more and more stages of production in order to satisfy different needs and wants. Then how do we link that to the overall macroeconomic activity that we see around us? Well, the goods and services make up what is known as the gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is the market value of all goods and services produced in a given period, and it is often the most important measure of economic activity or of how rich or poor a country is. So by GDP, we often measure it at the country level, or perhaps at the county or state level, or even local level, depending on which country or region you're looking at. It is the market value of all goods and services, so anything that is produced within this country. So it does not include imports. If you are consuming Belgian chocolate, which is manufactured in Belgium, that is not part of gross domestic product. On the other hand, if the UK exports, for example, our seafood to a European country, then that is part of our GDP because we produce that good and we sell it off as an export. That is part of our GDP. In a given period, so that means we often measure GDP within a given time frame. We can talk about annual GDP, biannual GDP, quarterly GDP, or even monthly GDP. There's also a distinction to be made between nominal gross domestic product and real gross domestic product. So nominal literally sums up the market value of all goods and services, including prices and quantity, whereas real GDP strips away the prices because maybe in a certain time period we see high inflation, and that inflates the GDP figure that we see. So to get a more accurate sense of the exact quantity of goods and services that have been produced and exchanged in that period, in that year, then we want to get rid of inflation, get rid of prices, just to look at the real quantities. because that is often a more accurate indication of true economic growth without it being contaminated by price fluctuations. Next dot point, fiscal spending. That refers to spending by the government. So the government will often need to spend in the economy in order to boost economic activity, for example, by providing subsidies to firms in order to incentivize them to produce goods and services or to produce more ethical goods and services. Governments might need to spend on hospitals, on schools, and all of that come from the government budget. Now, how does the government finance that? Well, that is through either tax collections or debt issuance. So government spending refer to outflows by the government, and tax revenues and the government issuing debt, those refer to inflows by the government. So tax, I'm sure you're all aware and familiar with the term. Debt, that refer to essentially IOU notes. The government issues a note, that is a debt. In exchange, it gets money. Next period, it will pay that back with interest. And you've learned about interest in the video that we've just watched from the Bank of England. What is inflation? Inflation is the change in the price level measured through a basket of representative goods. So note that inflation is different from prices. Prices refer to the level, whereas inflation refers to the change. So you can either measure it as this period's price minus last period's price, or you can measure it as a percentage change in the price level from last period to this period. So inflation is essentially a flow. It is a change that links two different time periods, whereas a price level is a more static term. Public good, what is that? Well, that is something, it is a good or service which is often provided by the public institution, as in by the government. Why is that? Well, because it is often not profitable for private firms to provide these goods. A public good has the characteristics of being non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Non-excludable means that if you enjoy it, you cannot stop other people from enjoying it. As in, if you take a walk in the park, you cannot literally stop other people from going to the park. And non-rivalrous means that if you are in the park, then you don't feel jealous that other people are in the park as well, unless it gets too crowded, perhaps. If you are in the swimming pool, if you are receiving education, if you're in the hospital, you're not fighting with anyone else for those resources. And because of that, everyone can enjoy or use those resources. And so it is not profitable enough for private institutions to provide this. But often these are very, very important goods that we need in the economy. We all need infrastructure, we need education, we need health services. And so because of that, the government will use their fiscal spending on these public goods. So let's learn a bit more about the different agents that exist in the economy. We've talked about these briefly during the video, but now let's go into a bit more depth and also with a bit more of an economic lens to it. So who are individuals? Individuals are agents who make decisions for themselves in the economy. Now, one key assumption that we make is that individuals are rational. And what this means is that people act in a very individualistic manner. They aren't altruistic. They are not influenced by emotions such as anger, wanting to take revenge, or love, or anything. They are only acting for themselves and wanting to maximize their own individual utility. Now, you might think that this is perhaps not truly reflective of reality, which is true, but in this model, in a very simplified version of the economy, it is very easy to model individuals in that way. We often also assume something called a representative agent model, which means that all the individuals in this economy are identical. And of course, we are all different, but if you take a step back, then the differences between us are not as important as perhaps the similarities that individuals share in an economic sense, in the sense that it divides them, it distinguishes them from businesses, from governments. And so we assume that if we take one individual, it's like taking them all. And so we assume that there is a representative individual in the economy. Instead of saying maybe that there are 100 individuals, I will say that there is one individual, one representative individual in this economy, and maybe one representative firm. Then businesses, they, like I said before, they spot a business opportunity, they transform resources into goods and services that can be then sold to individuals. In an economic model, the usual factors of production that we consider are capital and labor. So capital resources are things like equipment, machinery, land, and human resources refer to the people, the staff that the business employs in order to produce those goods and services. And these are complementary, right? Because you can't have a factory and no one operating the equipment, and you can't have just people but no equipment in order to produce things. Governments refer to the institutions that are there to try and set laws and regulations in society. So in the video, we saw the government and we saw the Bank of England. The Bank of England will conduct monetary policy, while the government will be there to set laws and conduct fiscal policy. So monetary policy refers to anything to do with money, including interest rates, money supply, and fiscal policy pertain to things like government spending, taxation, government borrowing, and of course, the provision of public goods. Communities are groups of individuals or firms that come together for a shared purpose. So you can think of not-for-profit organizations, charity organizations, and also, for example, trade unions, employer bargaining groups. Nations refer to a country as a whole, so this is distinct from the government because the government sets the laws and a government is also made up of individuals, whereas the nation refer to, essentially, it encompasses the model as a whole. Now, if I just look at this diagram, I'm looking at a closed economy, as in all the resources flow between the different agents, but they stay within this economy. But if, for example, I replicate this diagram many times, then I will be looking at an open economy. So there will be trade between different countries, between different nations. There will be international capital flows. There will be exports, there will be imports. So you will have learned that your action has impacts on other people's actions in an economy, which means that in an economy, no one is purely by themselves, and your actions will also hinge on what other people do, and the outcomes, the utility that you gain, it also hinges on the decisions of other people. So, for example, you might be more likely to save money with a bank if interest rates are high because you can get higher interest rate earnings. Now, if one business closes, then their rivals might have less competition, so they might choose to increase their prices. And how will consumers react to this? Well, this might be worse for the consumer, but better for the business. So there might be a trade-off. There might be different incentives that different people face in this economy. It's all well and nice if all of us act in cooperation, but if businesses want to raise prices and consumers want to see lower prices, then we might see some tension there. Levels of employment are also related to the economy. If the economy is doing well, if GDP is high, everyone has higher income, firms have higher profits, they might offer more employment, they might offer higher wages. And this will mean better job prospects and career decisions for you. And contrarily, if the economy is slack, if the labor market is not doing well, then maybe people have limited options and they might not be able to find a job that they enjoy the most. So in the interest of time, I think I will skip this part and move on to game theory, which is the bulk of today's discussion. So what is game theory? Game theory is the study of the strategic interactions among rational decision makers, and it provides a framework for analyzing the outcomes of situations where individual payoffs depend on the choices made by others. Now, why is game theory important? Well, we've just seen earlier that there are a lot of linkages between different people in this economy, which means that your decision and someone else's decision might conflict. You might be fighting for the same resources. You might want to see prices move in different directions. You might want to see interest rates move in different directions. A firm might want to produce more and more, but this means that it pollutes the local habitat and it pollutes the local river. And so what do we want to do in these cases? Well, game theory provides a useful framework for us to study that, because we can look at how different agents make decisions simultaneously or sequentially, and we can look at what outcome we're going to essentially arrive at. So, some more jargon before we delve into an example. A game is a representation of a situation in which multiple individuals interact strategically. So a game is never a one-person game. There are always at least two individuals, or they could be firms or governments, who interact strategically. So there will always be some interaction between these agents as well. They're not just acting themselves. It's not just one person deciding, I want to eat ice cream today, and another person deciding, I want to go to work today. Rather, in a game situation, they will interact strategically. There will be some either mutual cooperation or conflicts. Who are the players in this game? Players are individuals or agents who participate in the interaction. So you can kind of think of this as, for example, a game of chess, a game of Monopoly, but it doesn't have to be like that. We can extrapolate it to something which is wider and bigger around us. So you can think of two players, as in Tesco and Sainsbury, who are at a price war, and maybe Tesco thinks it wants to lower the price of milk. And because these products are very much substitutes, they're very much the same, whoever offers the lower price, consumers will go to that supermarket. And so Sainsbury might say, okay, next month I'm going to lower my price. And then they keep taking turns trying to lower their price until at a certain point they can't do that anymore. And who's getting hurt? Well, if the big supermarkets have a lot of pricing power, it might be the suppliers, the suppliers of milk to these supermarkets, who get their profit margins cut. Of course, lower prices will benefit consumers, but this is not beneficial for everyone, and there is a trade-off in every decision that is made in a game. And we can think of another example as where there is a monopoly in a market. Say on this street there is only one bakery. Now another cafe wants to open up and sell bread as well. And it first faces the decision of whether it does want to enter. It needs to calculate its profit margins and think whether it actually makes sense for them to enter the market. Then after that, if it does enter, the current bakery might think, do I want to go to a pricing war with them? Do I want to hire some people to smash their window down? Do I want to do more advertising to attract everyone to me instead of go to the cafe? Do I want to do some more innovation and come up with some more interesting types of breads or coffee? So you can see that there are all different sorts of decisions that have to be made by people, by players within a game. Now, what is a strategy? A strategy is a complete contingent plan that specifies what to do at each point in time. It's important to note that a strategy is different from an action. An action is where you say, for example, if you're playing chess, I will move my pawn to this location. So that is one action. A strategy is where you say, if my opponent moves their pawn here, I will move my rook here. And if my opponent moves their bishop there, I will move my knight there. So it specifies what to do at each point in time, at each possible scenario of the world that might eventually materialize. So graphically, you can think of this as a tree diagram. A strategy will tell you what to do at each branch on the tree, not just at one point in time, not just at the terminal where there's a lot of branches, but also at the beginning branches and the forks as well. The payoffs then are what you get at the end of the terminal branches. Payoffs are the result of each possible set of actions and players' preferences over these actions. So often we will think of payoffs as being something which is monetary. How much money are you getting at the end of this? A business might be thinking about whether it wants to invest in a business opportunity, whether it wants to invest in project A or project B. Now, the payoffs might be if you invest in project A, it gets £1 million in returns. If you invest in project B, you lose £500,000 in returns. You could think of payoffs like that, but also in a more general sense, payoffs don't have to be monetary. They could refer to literally the satisfaction, the utility units that you're getting from participating in this game and from whatever outcome is realized given everyone's interactions and choices. Payoffs also tell us about preferences. So if I say you have a payoff of 100 in plan A versus 90 in plan B, it doesn't objectively mean that you're getting more in plan A. Maybe it just means that whatever outcome you get, for example, a Samsung or an iPhone, that you just subjectively prefer what you're getting in outcome A. And if your preference for that is higher, then your payoff, your utility is higher. So often I will put numeric values on these just to be able to compare preferences. Now, the last two I'll talk about in comparison. Static games and dynamic games are two different types of games that we model. A static game is where all players move simultaneously at the same time. So, for example, if I say there is a pot of money in front of you, and I give each of you a piece of paper, and you write down how much you want from it, the person with the highest number wins and gets the whole thing. Then I open your pieces of paper at the same time. That is a static game. You all move at the same time. And so you can see that in a static game, people have imperfect information. They don't know everything that has happened in this world. They can only make their best guess. On the other hand, a dynamic game we can also call a sequential game. It's where players move one after the other and can observe their opponent's actions. So if you imagine that you're at a housing auction, everyone has walked around, observed the insides of the house, thought about whether they want to buy it, thought about their own how much money they have in their wallet, and people start giving bids. Then they start shouting bids one after the other, and so this is a dynamic game. Now, who moves first and who moves last does matter. In a dynamic game, some people might have a first mover advantage and some people might have a last mover advantage. So, for example, in a housing auction, the person who moves last will have the advantage because they've seen everyone else's bids and they will give a number that tops everyone else's in order to win the house. On the other hand, if people were at competition with each other in a different sense, maybe at university, you and some other classmates all have a business idea and you're not really friends, you're kind of rivals, and you all want to start a business that you all have a very, very similar idea. Now, whoever actually manages to create that startup first will have a first mover advantage because the idea will be innovative, no one will have seen it before, and so that person can attract all the customers that are there. So you can see how in a dynamic game, who moves first matters. Now, there's also a distinction to be made between a one-period game and a repeated game. So a static game and a dynamic game can be played once or twice or multiple times. If we play this once, then the incentives and the choices of people are going to differ compared to if you play a game multiple times repeatedly. If, for example, I ask you to split a pot of money in front of you, then if you only interact once, you don't care what impression you make on the other person if you're never going to see them again. On the other hand, if you're going to interact with them again and again tomorrow, the day after, then you might want to create a better impression of yourself because otherwise they're never going to let you win. So, for example, there's a reality TV show called Split or Steal where the show host asks two contestants, I have a pot of money in front of me. Say it's £1 million. You can negotiate. You have 10 minutes to talk. There's two choices for each of you. You can press it on the button, you can press the button to split, or you can press the button to steal. If both people press split, the money is split equally between them. If both people press steal, both of them get 0. If one person presses split and one person presses steal, the person who chooses to steal gets everything. So you have time to talk beforehand, but whatever agreement you reach, that's not guaranteed to be actually realized because people will have an incentive to try and steal it in order to try and get all the money for themselves. And so this is what we call a prisoner's dilemma. What is socially optimal is often not what is achieved in practice. Now, if you just play this game once and you never see your opponent again, people will have an incentive to steal. But if you play this game repeatedly, day after day, then maybe you'll be a bit scared to press steal because you know that next period they're not going to trust you again, or maybe they want to take revenge and steal from you next period, which means you're going to be left with nothing no matter what happens. So you can see how game theory can be applied in a whole range of different scenarios, and very interesting scenarios as well, whether monetary or not. So let's move on and let's see an example. Here I've put up a static game. And in a static game, we model it in what's called a strategic form. The strategic form refers to this matrix form that we have in front of us. So there are two people, person A and person B. Both of them have an option to work or to shirk, which means to not work. So you can think of this as where in school, your teacher places you into pairs to work on a group assignment. You don't know this classmate very well, they're not your friend, you're not really sure if they're going to work or if they're going to shirk, and both of you have an incentive, obviously, to not do work, but both of you want to do well in the assignment and impress the teacher, get a good A-levels and come to Oxford. So there's two players, you each have two actions, so 2 to the power of 2 means that there are 4 outcomes. So each cell in this box refer to an outcome, and the numbers in each cell refer to the payoffs of person A and person B. So person A is referred to as the row player. So there's the two rows, work and shirk, and person A decides between the two rows. Person B is the column player. The two columns of work and shirk are the decisions and choices of person B. Person A's payoffs come before the comma in each cell, and person B's payoffs come after the comma in each cell. And I have color-coded it so that it's easier to distinguish. Now, you're working on a group assignment. If you both choose to work, you both get full marks on the assignment. Everyone gets utility of 100 each. So this 100 is not referring necessarily to the mark that you get. It could refer to how much satisfaction, how much utility that you're getting from the reward of getting a great mark on the assignment. On the other hand, if we look at the bottom right box, if no one chooses to work, then you're both getting 0. You've both gotten 0 on the assignment. You've gotten no satisfaction or no utility at all. Now, what about the other two diagonal boxes, cells? If person A chooses to work and person B chooses to not work, what happens? Well, person A will have essentially done perhaps twice the amount of work, and person B got away with a good mark, but they didn't do anything. Maybe they were on Netflix, maybe they were playing football, who knows, but they were enjoying their leisure time. And so person B's utility, person B's payoff is 150, whereas person A's payoff is only 50. On the other hand, if person A doesn't work, they get to be the one to enjoy free time while free riding on person B, so they get 150 as payoff. And when person B does all the work, they're not happy about it. They get a satisfaction of only 50. So I hope that makes sense and that it's so far so good for everyone. Now, another thing to note is that I've made this matrix very symmetrical, as in if you change the letters A and B, it's still the same. It doesn't have to be that way. So maybe person B's utility from working could be 120 and not 100 in the first cell. So I've just made it symmetrical for simplicity. It doesn't have to be that way. Just keep that in mind. What's going to happen? Well, we're going to use game theory to try and solve this problem. So first, let's take the perspective of person A. Person A has a choice between working and shirking on the row, and person A cannot control which column they are in. So we're going to take each column in turn, the column where B works and the column where B does not work. So firstly, in the column where B works, in that state of nature, in that environment, what does person A do? Person A will compare their payoffs between working and shirking. So person A is going to compare the numbers before the comma, the 100 and the 150. And person A is going to notice, oh, 150 is better than 100. So if person B works, I'm not going to work because I prefer getting 150 over 100. So that's in the scenario where B chooses to work. What about the scenario where B chooses to not work? Well, person A again looks at their payoffs. If they work, they get 50. If they don't work, they get 0. So evidently, to maximize their utility and to maximize their payoffs, person A will choose to work. And now notice here how person A is being rational. They're not letting emotions come into the equation. In real life, person A might be like, okay, you're not working. Why do I have to work? I don't want to let you free ride on me. If you're not working, no one is working. So here, rationality means that person A is not going to think that way. Person A is going to think, okay, whatever, I'm not getting 100, but 50 is still better than nothing. So here, person A's action is if B shirks, I work. And so person A's strategy is if B works, I don't, and if B doesn't work, I do. That is person A's strategy. And you will notice that I have put an underline on each number where that's the choice, that's the decision made by person A, so that when we put things together, we will know what we have done. Now, something to take note of is dominant strategy. A dominant strategy is something which is optimal regardless of what the others do. So if we had a dominant strategy here, then it would look something like, regardless of whether B works or doesn't work, I will work. Now, that's not what we have. We have a strategy being, if B works, I don't, and if B doesn't work, I do. So here we do not have a dominant strategy. But if I wanted to make it so that A had a dominant strategy, I could, for example, make this number 200 instead of 100. And so if B works, 200 is better than 150, I choose to work. And if B doesn't work, 50 is better than 0, I still work. So that is called a dominant strategy. And here I haven't modeled in that way, but if I want to rationalize it, I could say, well, maybe person A is a high achiever and really, really wants to get into Oxford. So regardless of whether B works or not, A wants a full mark on that assignment. And so A has a strong incentive to work. And so you will see here that all of the numbers come down to the preferences of both people. If someone really, really values their leisure time, then this 150 might be even higher than what it currently is. So we have looked at person A. Now let's take a look at person B. So person B has a choice between the two columns of work and shirk, and person B has no choice between the two rows of work and shirk. So again, we take a look at those two scenarios that it cannot control, and then we look at what it does in each scenario. So suppose that A works. Well, B is going to compare its payoffs from working versus not working. So its payoffs are in blue after the comma, and it compares them 100 and 150. So what does B do? B chooses to shirk because 150 is higher than 100. And in the last scenario, let's take the row where A chooses to not work. And so here, B decides, oh, I think I will work now because 50 is better than 0, as in 50 is still better than nothing. So here again, assuming rationality, B is also not going to allow emotions to cloud their judgment. They're not going to be like, I don't want A to free ride off me. I still think that 50 is better than nothing. And so if A does not work, I will put in some work. And so what do we see in the end? We see that these are the two outcomes that we end up in. So if you followed what I've done, and if you've, for example, drawn this in front of you, and I do encourage you to do that, and you also put the underlines on where I put the underlines, you will see that there are two boxes where there are underlines on both numbers. And if there's an underline on both numbers in the box, I'm going to call that an equilibrium. It's an equilibrium outcome. And an equilibrium is a stable self-enforcing outcome because it means that both agents want to end up in that box, in that cell. And so I've made a circle on the cells in the box where we have an equilibrium. Now I'm going to call this a Nash equilibrium. A Nash equilibrium refers to a profile of strategies such that each player's strategy is an optimal response to the other player's strategies. So everyone has strategized about what they want to do. They have considered the different states of the world that they cannot control, and then they've thought about what their actions are going to be in each state. So they've come up with their best strategy, and if both people end up in that box, then we have an equilibrium. And it's named after John Nash, who coined the term in the 1900s. So perhaps this is surprising to you. This game is not a prisoner's dilemma, because in the prisoner's dilemma, we will end up in this box where it's the worst outcome for everyone. And this is also not the socially optimal outcome. You will see that this is the socially optimal outcome because it gives the most equitable and fair outcome to everyone. So it is something that we call Pareto optimal or Pareto efficient, and here we don't achieve that. We don't achieve that first best outcome because of the way incentives play out in this game. So in the real world, we want to be at the most equitable and efficient outcome, but we often don't get there. So in the market, we have something called externalities, and especially negative externalities are really bad, because in the example that I just gave, maybe a firm is in a game with a local community. The local community takes the products the firm produces, and the firm gains profits, so they are codependent on each other. But maybe the firm will pollute the local river so that the fish are all dying and the people are missing out on things to eat. Then in that case, it's a negative externality. It's not a result of the market directly, but it's a bad outcome that comes about as a result of the interactions, the decisions of people. So in those cases, we're not going to end up at the first best outcome, because maybe the firm thinks, I will pollute, okay, but that's just because I produce too much. Well, not too much, but it means that I get to produce more. And if I get to produce more, I don't care how much pollution I'm putting into the air or the river. So in those cases, often we want the government, the policymaker, to step in and to address those market externalities, those market failures. So, for example, the government can provide, can set a tax on the firm so that this 150, the decision to do something bad, is lower. Because if there is a production tax on how much you're producing, how much you're selling, then the profits you're getting aren't that high anyways. It's not 150, maybe it's only a 90, in which case this 100 would be better. And so there will be a dominant strategy to do the good thing for the whole society. In the same way, a government can provide subsidies so that firms who are being more environmental can make this become something like 160. And so even if a firm does not produce and sell that much, the subsidy means that it does achieve a higher profit than if it decided to do something bad for the environment and for society. And so you can see how government intervention in these cases can help us address market failures, which is also another reason why we need the government there and why we need different agents in the economy to try and strike the right balance. Now, so far, we've looked at a static game, and you can think of this in a dynamic game form, where person A moves first and person B moves second. Now, what do you think is going to happen in this scenario? Well, I've just seen a question in the chat. Shouldn't the people who put more work in meant to be paid more? Yes, exactly. The person who put in more work, they are meant to be paid more, but suppose that the teacher doesn't have full information. So the teacher doesn't know who put in more effort. The teacher just sees that this is a combined effort between two people. And remember what I said about these numbers not being exactly reward. This is a sense of satisfaction or utility. It's an abstract term. So it doesn't mean that you're getting a mark of 50 or a mark of 150. Both people are getting the same mark from the assignment, but the 150 means that you haven't even spent time on the assignment, but you've gotten a good mark, which means you have more utility. Whereas the 50 means you've spent a lot of time on the assignment and you're not happy that the other person put in no time and got a good mark, which means you have a reduced utility payoff. I hope that makes sense. So back to the dynamic game example, suppose person A moves first. Suppose that you split the assignment into someone does something this week and then person B does something next week. Well, what's going to happen? Person A is going to choose this week and then person B will see the outcome. So person B will have complete information. Then if we take a logical stance and solve backwards, now, if person A works, person B does not. If person A doesn't work, person B does. So if person A knows this, it knows that it can somehow manipulate the situation so that person B will be forced to pick up the slack next week. And so person A might choose to just not do any work this week because it knows that if it doesn't do work, person B will pick up the slack to do work next week in order to avoid getting zero utility and zero satisfaction. And so here, if we make it into a sequential game, person A will have a first mover advantage. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. It is this way if person A knows person B's character and person B can do nothing against person A's choice. So often the image that you give to other people, your reputation, your credibility, all of that plays an important role. So a question from Thomas, are there specific names for different types of scenarios, like the current work shirk one, which is high risk, high reward if you choose to shirk? So not in this example, there's no particular name for each of these boxes. This one is the first best scenario, it's the Pareto optimal one. This one is a Nash equilibrium. This one is a Nash equilibrium as well. But no, there are no specific names for each of these cells. Of course, if you put it into a different setting, there might be names for it. Like if you have a prisoner's dilemma, then that will be in the Nash equilibrium, and that will be the dominant strategy Nash equilibrium as well. Because in a prisoner's dilemma, everyone has a dominant strategy to try and steal all the money. And in that case, no one is winning. Everyone has a dominant strategy to steal or to cheat. So in that case, that one will be the dominant strategy Nash equilibrium. So what does this mean for us? What have we learned? Well, we can apply this to a range of different scenarios. You can apply it to group assignments, advertising and pricing, entry into new markets. And we've learned that you need to understand your rivals, that incentives matter, credibility matters, and who moves first matters. So really what image you portray to the other person is really important, because otherwise they might retaliate on you if it's a dynamic game, or especially if it's a repeated game, there might be situations that are detrimental to you in the long run. So, you know, if two firms initially agree to fix prices, which I guess is illegal, but say that they choose to fix prices, and then in next month, one firm chooses to break that promise, then after that, the other firm which got cheated on might decide to take revenge or take legal action even, which would be even worse. So can you think of any more examples where we can apply game theory? Please put your thoughts into the chat. I look forward to hearing or reading what ideas you come up with and how we can apply game theory to different scenarios. War, yeah, great, Thomas. So actually one example that I often teach in terms of game theory is the Cold War, because the United States and the USSR, during the Cold War, they both had nuclear missiles, but they're both not very sure what the state of those weapons are in the other region. They're not sure whether the other power wants to launch it, and they don't necessarily want to start World War III. So in the game here, instead of work and shirk, you could model this as attack or keep the peace. And you could put in different payoffs depending on what the two different agents prefer, how belligerent they are, and how much they want to avoid another World War III, how much they want to keep the peace. So that's a very good example. I guess another example that I often give is in sport. So for example, like if you're the goalkeeper and someone is going to kick the soccer ball in your direction, you might have to strategize about whether you think they're going to kick it left and right. And based on that, as the goalkeeper, you might try to decide whether you want to move left and right. Yep, there's an example for marketing. If both shirk, nothing be sold and nothing be bought. If one seller and buyer shirks by lowering the price, or else they won't buy the item. And if both work, it's fair and buyer pays for a good price and seller receives good money. Yep, that's a great example and very much studied in industrial organization. Could the trade war be an example? Yeah, very good example and very topical as well. And to be honest, even the tariffs that we are seeing in the current day. So one country has imposed tariffs, they've moved first. How do other countries respond? Another example is social media. Perhaps you can explain how it is applicable, Sky, MBS. Yep, so social media, I guess like all of them would be at war with each other in terms of how many consumers, how many users they want to get, how much advertising they want to do, what new features they choose to introduce, how many customers they essentially want to attract. Pricing decisions in oligopolies. Yep, that's very good as well. What is an oligopoly? So an oligopoly is where there are a few large players in the market. So a monopoly is where you have one firm. You have one bakery on this road. You can't choose to buy bread from anywhere else. And an oligopoly, it's kind of like supermarkets. You have Tesco, M&S, Sainsbury's, Waitrose. There are a few large players. And then moving another degree further, we have monopolistic competition, where we have a lot of small players. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have perfect competition, where all the firms are pretty much identical, which means that prices have to be really, really low in order to actually attract consumers to buy from them. So you can see that as there is more pricing power, as the firm gets larger in size, in scale, in power, then it has greater influence.